Hello and welcome back for another video here, and this video is also going to be on SQL on demand, or understanding serverless compute within Azure Synapse Analytics. Now, in a previous video we took a look at how to take advantage of that, at least on a very small scale. We took a look at 3 different examples. I showed you how you could just query the data directly, how you could query the data from maybe a pipeline or a data flow. There's a lot of different reasons why you might do that. That's something you have to consider. And then we also took a look at how we could do this and connect directly from Power BI desktop. Once again, when we did that, I said, hey, you could also connect to your serverless compute. You can connect from like Management Studio as well, right? Because I gave you the server name. You saw that in that video. But what I want to talk about here is more along the lines of cost management. How much does serverless on demand cost us? And how do we maybe manage that? How do we find bad queries that are costing us a lot of money, and how do we maybe put thresholds in place that prevent us from being billed a lot of money? So first of all, the first thing I want to show you very quickly is the first part of this, which is going to be how do we put thresholds in place, right? When you're working with serverless compute, you're working with SQL on demand, you get charged $5 per terabyte of data that's processed. Well, what does that mean? I'll show you here in just a minute exactly what that means, and we'll take a look at some Microsoft documentation here. But what we're talking about when we talk about managing the cost is I can go down to manage, of course, inside of Azure Synapse Analytics. And then if I come over here to my built-in compute, which is going to show up on every ASA environment, Azure Synapse Analytics environment, I can click right here on the little cost control center. That opens up over here. And this gives me an idea of how much data I've processed, right? So this month, I did a 3-hour presentation on Azure Synapse Analytics. So I've done about 5 gigabytes of data processed. Today I've done about 40 megabytes, and that translates for the entirety of the week as well. If I want to put some thresholds in place at the daily level, at the weekly level, and at the monthly level, we can do that right here through the UI. And so through the UI, I can come in and say, look, we're getting charged $5 per terabyte of data that's processed. We're having a lot of data that's processed. It's costing us a lot of money. So on a weekly or on a daily basis, I want to go ahead and put this somewhere in the range of 10. Now, you can also do this at the weekly and the monthly level, or at the weekly and monthly level, you could just leave it undeterred, right? Unmessed with if you want. That's up to you. But you could set it at each level, or you could set it at one individual level. And that's it. That's how easily you can do it. Now, you can also do this in SQL. So from Management Studio, you can just connect, and you can do this through a SQL script as well. So you don't have to do it through the UI. And once again, we're going to circle back to that here in just a moment. So that's the first thing that I wanted to show you. The next thing that I want to show you is how do we evaluate what queries are being run, which queries are really costing us a lot of money. Mine are very small, right? I'm not trying to get charged a bunch of money just for doing YouTube videos or things like that. But what I can do is I can come over to the Monitor Hub, and there's a lot of great capabilities within ASA, within monitoring. But what I really enjoy here, and this is a newer feature that hasn't been around since the beginning, is this little SQL request section right here. And when I go to SQL request, I can filter through the monitoring here, and I can look at all of the queries that have been run against my serverless compute. I can come in here and I can look at them, and that's what we're looking at right now. So you'll notice right here I have 10 megabytes of data that was processed, 10 megabytes of data, 10 megabytes, 10 megabytes. Now here's the thing. That is the minimum that you can ever be processed. So if you queried a file that had 1 row and 1 column and it had an integer value of 1, so you literally just queried a file that said 1, it would still be 10 megabytes of data, even though we know it's significantly less. So that's the minimum. Now, if you get charged for $5 per terabyte of data processed, then I would just take, $5 divided by 1 million. That's how much you're getting charged per megabyte, and then multiply that times 10, and you're going to find out it is literally fractions of a penny. So serverless on demand can be really, really inexpensive, and this is why it's such a big deal that you don't have to have a dedicated pool running all the time. All right. So what if you had a query that was running a little bit longer, that was taking longer? Let me go back about 7 days here, see if we get lucky. We did not. Let's go back about 30 days to when I did my workshop. And we'll see I have some in here that are 164 megabytes, that are 154 megabytes, right? So let's look at this one. If I were looking through here and I saw one that was 20 terabytes, and I'm like, whoa, this query is costing me $100 every time it gets ran. what's going on with this query, well, you can come in here, you can look for those, and then you can come over here and actually look at, first of all, who ran it, right? So we see it was Ilm Pearson. We see it ran successfully. I can see how long it took to run. And then I can come over here and I can actually take a look at the query. And so if I click more right here on this specific one, it says it's an external table stats query. All right, so that right there is not exactly what I was expecting, but this is essentially another topic I want to do a video on, which is on external tables. And so this is where you have external tables that you are doing something with. So data processed, we're about to go take a look at this right now. Data processed, if you're just querying data, is just pulling the data, reading it in, and then sending it to the endpoint wherever that is. If you're using external tables, you could be doing more. You could be reading the data and writing the data. So there's more data processing that's going on in that process. And that's what we see down here with external tables. But let's find one that's not external table related, like this one right here. So select top 100. And you'll see that if we look at it, it's just a very simple table. Now here's what's happening here. Select top 100 star from taxi data is actually a query that is pulling the information from an external table. So I've built an external table on top of my data lake. There's no data that's actually in the external table. It just makes it easier to write queries against my data lake, right? And so this can be very advantageous for a few different reasons, which I will highlight and cover in a future video, not this one. But that's what this query is doing. So nothing, mind-blowing here, nothing incredible. But what I would be looking for is something like select star from table where year equals 2010. And I'm like, well, I know the way this is going to work. A where clause doesn't minimize the data processed. It's going to have to read all the data that's in that folder, right? It's going to have to read all of it and then filter it down. So I'm still processing a ton of data, even with the where clause. In fact, I have an example of that somewhere. I know I do. It was usually in the 108. Here we go. You see this 108 megabytes? This is the exact same query as the one that I run that's around 88 megabytes. The only difference is I add a where clause and it actually reads more data. I'm filtering data out and it reads more data. So if I click on the more here, let me make sure it is. I'm saying, all right, select everything here where the month equals 1. So I have 12 months of data in there, but I'm only bringing back the month equals 1. And so you would think, well, that's 1/12 of the data. Shouldn't it be less than if I just queried all the data? And the answer is no, because we're not writing data, we're not writing a query directly against an index table in a database where it's going to filter it out based on the index, right? It's actually reading all that data that's in that folder. It's reading all of it, and then it's filtering it after the fact. So if I see that these are queries that are costing me a lot of money, that's where I start to look at it and say, okay, if my users are always querying it by month, maybe I should be partitioning my data and loading it into my data lake on a monthly basis. And if I did that, I would instantly be able to improve the performance and, more importantly, improve the cost, right? Because now I'm only actually processing 1/12 of the data. So this is pretty awesome as well. And this is where we can get insights into what's going on with the data. And I've seen this work. I've seen this process of come over here, diagnose what it is, and then come up with a solution. And then it's all about just educating the end user and saying, hey, when you query the data, make sure you run those SQL on-demand queries directly against that folder, that partition data that you want. All right, so the last thing I want to show you here is the documentation. And I'm going to put this documentation right here in the description below. So I'm going to put it in the description below. You can come in here and read it. I'm not going to go through all of this right here and bore you to death, but this talks about processing data, data processed. One thing it talks about in here, if I remember correctly, is parquet data. If you're pulling from that because the data is compressed, how that can be a great cost-saving mechanism as well. It talks about create external table as. This is talking about the amount of data that's written. That is part of processed data. So it's not just reading the data. If you use something like create external table as, which is a way of reading data and then writing it, if you use that, that will also be processed as well. So that's going to be part of that cost. And then there's some other information in here about statistics and rounding, what data process does not include. And a little bit further down, it talks about some things you can do around cost control, but also the SQL stuff that I talked about. Remember I said you can connect from Management Studio and there are some DMVs you can run to see how much data has been processed, but you can also do your cost control from Management Studio. So here, they're doing it in the UI like I did. But if you want to do it from Management Studio, you can come down here, connect to Management Studio, go take a look at the last video to find out exactly how to connect, where I talked about serverless compute, writing queries against serverless compute, SQL on demand. And this right here will give you the information of how to run stored procedures that set those budgets. Also, you can come down here and you can do some other stuff as far as finding out about how much data was processed as well. All right, so I don't want to take up any more of your time here. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, hit that like and subscribe button. And until next time, have a good week.